Imagine waking up in a city that has just been bombed to absolute rubble, and then it's arbitrarily carved into four separate zones by foreign militaries.
Right. Just total chaos.
Exactly. I mean, the banks are gone. The police forces are completely compromised. They're basically answering to whichever occupying general happens to be in a good mood that morning.
Which is terrifying, honestly.
It really is. And the only way you can get basic survival goods, say penicillin for a sick child or coal to survive the winter, is to buy it from a smuggler in a dark, shattered alleyway.
Yeah, the black market is literally the only market.
Right. So in a world functioning like that, what does the word ethics even mean?
It's a huge question.
Welcome to today's deep dive. We are stepping into the literal and metaphorical shadows of the 1949 film The Third Man, directed by Carol Reed.
Such a masterpiece.
It really is. But we're setting some strict ground rules for you today. We are not doing a plot summary.
No spoilers here.
Definitely not spoiling the ending. And we are not just doing some, scene-by-scene cinematic review. We are using this piece of art as a philosophical mirror.
And it is a profoundly unsettling mirror to look into, I have to say.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. When you strip away the mechanics of the mystery, what remains is an incredibly sharp examination of the human condition. Specifically, how we navigate reality when every reliable structure around us has just completely collapsed.
Which brings up something I noticed. We have this impressive stack of sources guiding our exploration today, right?
Oh, yeah, tons of material.
We've got essays from the Criterion Collection, a really great review by Roger Ebert, historical context from the British Film Institute archives, cinematic analysis from Sight and Sound, and even these academic discussions on post-war psychology.
It's a lot to get through.
It is, but okay, let's unpack this, because there was this single haunting premise that just kept surfacing in all my notes.
What was it?
It's this idea that sometimes the truth is not hidden. It is simply uncomfortable to accept.
Wow. Yeah, that hits hard. And, to understand the gravity of that premise, you really have to look at the soil from which this story grew.
The environment itself.
Exactly. The BFI historical documents paint a very grim picture of post-World War II Vienna.
Right, because we usually think of Vienna and we think of classical music and palaces.
Yeah, you have to discard that completely. The romanticized, waltz-filled Vienna of the history books is gone. By 1949, this is a city existing in absolute purgatory.
Purgatory is a good word for it.
It's a landscape defined by black markets and just profound political instability. The fundamental institutions that normally dictate right and wrong, they've completely dissolved.
Well, wait, I want to challenge that slightly.
Sure.
Isn't blaming the environment just kind of a convenient excuse? I mean, humans have survived horrific atrocities and systemic collapses throughout history without entirely losing their moral compass.
That's true, yeah.
So why does post-war Vienna get a pass for this pervasive moral ambiguity?
Well, it's not about getting a pass, really. It's about the literal mechanics of survival.
How so?
When a society's institutions collapse, the moral compass doesn't disappear, but it loses its magnetic north.
Oh, that makes sense.
The academic discussions on post-war psychology really highlight this. In an environment where the legal system is totally corrupt and the economy is entirely underground, abstract concepts like universal justice become deadly luxuries.
Deadly luxuries. Wow.
Yeah. Think about it. If a mother has to buy watered-down black market medicine to save her child, she is participating in a corrupt system.
Right. She has no choice.
She is compromising her ethics to fulfill a localized duty to her family. That pervasive ambiguity is the perfect breeding ground for film noir, because everyone, by necessity, becomes complicit.
That makes a dark kind of sense. You can't keep your hands clean if the only water available is muddy.
That's a great way to put it.
But before we can really understand why the characters struggle with the truth, we have to talk about how the film visually forces the audience to question their own reality.
Yes, the visual language of deception.
Exactly. Director Carol Reed manipulates human perception using these foundational elements of film noir, particularly this stark shadow composition.
It's iconic.
It really is. The Criterion Collection essays spend a lot of time analyzing this. You basically spend the whole film looking at silhouettes. Figures cast against crumbling brick walls where their features are just entirely obscured.
And that chiaroscuro effect, the intense contrast between light and dark, it isn't just a stylistic choice.
What is it then?
It's a psychological trigger.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Human evolutionary biology actually wires us to fear obscured faces.
I never thought about that.
It's fascinating. We rely so heavily on facial microexpressions to gauge trust, right? To determine if the person approaching us is a friend or a threat.
So when you can't see them properly.
Exactly. When harsh lighting plunges half a face into absolute darkness, our brains cannot gather that vital data. The amygdala, which processes fear, immediately flags the situation as dangerous.
So the anxiety we feel watching it isn't just atmospheric, it's an actual biological response.
Precisely. The visual environment is actively hostile to cognitive clarity. Your brain is like working overtime trying to fill in the missing information in those shadows.
Which spikes your adrenaline.
Right. Read is inducing a state of physiological stress in you that mirrors the character's psychological stress.
That is wild. And that physical vertigo is brilliantly amplified by the cinematography.
Oh, the camera work.
Yes. The camera work in this film is legendary. Specifically, the relentless use of Dutch angles.
For anyone unfamiliar, a Dutch angle is when the camera is physically tilted so the horizon line is completely slanted.
Right. The entire world looks like it's sliding off the screen. And here's where it gets really interesting.
Oh.
Watching a sequence shot this way, I felt like it was like walking on the deck of a ship during a violent storm.
Yes. That's exactly how it feels.
Your brain subconsciously registers that the world is fundamentally off balance long before your conscious mind even identifies the specific danger.
That inner conflict is so intense. Your vestibular system, your inner ear, it expects stability and equilibrium, right?
Right.
But your visual cortex is receiving data that stability no longer exists. It creates a literal sense of motion sickness.
Which is brilliant, but also exhausting. I was thinking about this while reading the Sight and Sound cinematic analysis. Is the camera, through these tilted angles, warning us that appearances often deceive? Or is it mocking our desire for a straight, orderly reality?
That's a great distinction.
Like, are we being laughed at for expecting the world to be level in the first place?
Well, what's fascinating here is I wouldn't say it's mocking us. I'd say it's diagnosing a condition.
A condition.
Yeah, we have been trained by decades of traditional storytelling to expect a very specific type of protagonist. We expect a hero who walks into a room, objectively assesses the facts, and solves the problem with a straight moral spine.
The classic good guy.
Right. But the Dutch angles physically argue that this traditional perception of a hero is incompatible with the shadowy reality of human nature. You literally cannot have a straightforward, upright hero in a fundamentally slanted world.
Because standing up straight in a slanted room just makes you look absurd.
Exactly.
The environment corrupts the perception.
It does. The visual language is a constant, blaring warning system that relying on surface-level appearances is a fatal error. What you see is definitively not what you get.
Okay, so that physical vertigo from the Dutch angles doesn't just disorient our eyes. It perfectly mirrors the psychological vertigo the characters, and obviously you, the audience, feel when the baseline reality fractures.
Yes, the visual and the psychological go hand in hand.
Because if we literally cannot trust our own eyes, how on earth are we supposed to trust another human being?
And that is the terrifying logical progression we have to explore next. When visual reality fractures, psychological reality shatters right behind it.
Which brings us to trust.
Exactly. The psychology of trust and betrayal, which is heavily debated in the academic sources we reviewed. The whole discussion hinges on this remarkably provocative question, friend or stranger.
How well do you actually know the people you've tied your life to?
It is the ultimate anxiety, isn't it?
It really is.
Trust fundamentally relies on a baseline assumption of a shared reality. I trust you because I believe we are looking at the same world, operating under the same set of facts, and playing by the same rules.
But the historical context of survival in 1949 Vienna reminds us that desperate people wear masks.
Yes, and when someone's mask finally slips, the trauma of the betrayal isn't just that a friend lied to you.
It's the sudden, horrifying realization that your own judgment is entirely flawed.
Exactly. The foundation of your own perception just crumbles.
I really want to dig into the mechanics of this self-deception because truth is not always convenient. Why do humans willfully ignore the obvious?
It happens all the time.
Right. Think about it in our daily lives. Why do we stare at a glaring inconsistency in a friend's behavior or like a massive red flag in a relationship and just look the other way?
Because confronting that red flag requires action.
Yeah,
It requires a complete restructuring of your reality, and cognitive dissonance is exhausting.
it really is.
When you hold two conflicting beliefs, like my friend is a good person and my friend is doing something horrific, the brain experiences intense psychological pain.
So it has to fix it.
Right. To resolve that pain, the brain will almost always discard the new, inconvenient truth rather than dismantle the old foundational belief.
It's a survival mechanism. I was trying to conceptualize this, and I was thinking about it like this. Trust is like a heavy winter coat,
All
right?
right, I like that.
And the truth is the freezing wind when that coat is ripped away. The truth isn't hiding. We just desperately want to stay warm in our illusions.
That is a brilliant analogy.
Trusting a localized group, your friends, your squad, it's essentially a psychological immune system. It protects you from the immediate infection of a chaotic, unpredictable world. You cluster together to stay safe.
Yes, and the emotional friction there is immense. In a landscape of moral ambiguity, maintaining that psychological safety takes precedence over empirical facts.
The facts just don't matter as much as the warmth.
Exactly. The BFI notes actually detail how ordinary people, former teachers, clerks, they became black market smugglers.
Just everyday people.
Everyday people. If you were friends with one of them, confronting their crimes meant losing your only safety net. Realizing you've been betrayed forces a kind of psychological collapse.
Because you don't just lose the friend.
Right, you lose your self-efficacy. If you were so wrong about the person closest to you, what else are you wrong about?
It makes you question every single foundation you've built your life on. It's an agonizing state of vulnerability.
It really is.
So if trust makes us vulnerable, loyalty is the lock that keeps us in that vulnerable state.
Oh, the trap of allegiance.
Yes, even when our own morals demand that we walk away.
This is arguably the most complex tension in the entire stack of sources we went through. The academic tension between ethics and loyalty.
We are taught from childhood that loyalty is one of the highest virtues, right?
Absolutely. You stand by your friends. You don't abandon your people.
But both the sight and sound analysis and Roger Ebert's review point out that the third man actively subverts this. It portrays moral decisions as rarely simple.
Because loyalty, by its very nature, is a localized ethic.
What do you mean by that?
Well, it only applies to a specific individual or an in-group. Universal ethics, the concepts of justice, of not harming the innocent, of objective truth, those are macro concepts.
Okay, I see.
When localized loyalty clashes with universal ethics, a severe fracture occurs. The critical essays heavily focus on this lesson. Loyalty can, and frequently does, violently cloud human judgment.
It completely blinds us. So what does this all mean for you? I want to push back hard on this traditional virtue of loyalty because this applies far beyond post-war Vienna.
Oh, it's incredibly relevant today.
Think about how this plays out in modern daily life for everyone listening. How often do we excuse vicious office politics because we are defending our team?
All the time.
How often do we provide emotional cover for a toxic friend, ignoring the damage they do to others simply because we've known them for 10 years?
It's a hard truth to face.
It is. Sometimes loyalty isn't a virtue at all. Sometimes it is merely a convenient excuse we use to avoid making incredibly difficult, painful ethical choices.
It is significantly easier to say, I am standing by my friend, than it is to look in the mirror and say, I am actively standing against the moral atrocities my friend is committing.
Because taking that stand requires conflict. It requires grief. So we use loyalty as a shield for our own cowardice.
Wow, yeah.
The question that kept ringing in my head was this. At what point does unwavering loyalty to a friend cross the line into becoming complicit with a stranger?
That's the turning point.
If your friend changes, or if you finally discover they were never who you thought they were, are you being a loyal friend, or are you just providing a smokescreen for someone doing harm?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, that tension represents the ultimate post-war dilemma. It is the defining psychological struggle of mid-century Europe. Well, think about the survival mechanisms required during a massive global conflict. You survive by relying entirely on your immediate circle. You protect your squad, your neighbors, your family, fiercely and unquestioningly.
You build that localized immune system we talked about?
Exactly. But then the war ends. Society has to be rebuilt. And suddenly, the dilemma shifts. You are forced to choose between the personal bonds that kept you alive during the trauma and the universal ethics required to rebuild a functioning, shattered world.
Because if everyone continues to only protect their own tribe, regardless of the ethical cost to the wider world, society cannot function.
Exactly. The black market thrives. The innocent continue to suffer.
The Criterion essays point out that moral ambiguity isn't just a stylistic backdrop here. It is a reflection of a society deeply traumatized by the realization that good men can do horrific things in the name of loyalty.
And upholding true, universal ethics often requires an act of devastating personal betrayal.
You literally have to betray